It'd be fair to say that the whole point of representation is to normalize something. The question is, who is being represented exactly? What do they hope to achieve, and why? Keep that in the back of your mind. I've got 2 photos for you. The first is from the first ever Pride Parade held in Los Angeles in July 1970. This was following the Stonewall riots the previous year, and a symbolic gesture in the push for sexual liberation, gender equality, and so on that would continue in decades to come. The second image was taken at a Pride Parade in Montreal around 2020. I don't think I need to go into detail. The photo speaks for itself. Looking at the photos side by side, which of these invokes more pride, would you say? Which of these is a simple reminder that people are allowed to live their lives in peace, and which of them is celebrating disgusting behavior, almost tantamount to grooming? Do you think this is normal? Do you want the photo on the right to be normalized? That it's okay to bring children and expose them to openly fetishistic displays? Is this what pride is really about? Is this what people really want? Who exactly are the ones being represented here? I wanted to start off with this example because in many ways it sums up how hollow the entirely manufactured push for representation really is. Just as there were people in the 1970s or the 1950s, or predating the entire Common Era, that were perfectly fine living their lives as gay, lesbian, transgender, and so on, there are many people today who fall under the LGBT umbrella that don't feel the need to be part of genuinely degenerate behavior, or regardless, just want to live their lives in peace. Do you think these people, the vast majority, feel represented and proud of the photo on the right? Do you really think they want those people to stand for who they really are? Like the Pride Parade, the idea of representation is almost unrecognizable from what it once was compared to what it's now come to be. When we talk about representation in media or otherwise, what we're actually referring to is forced representation, because much like the sick freaks trying to normalize BDSM and nudity around a child, something we'd call grooming in any other context, but now everyone's too afraid to call this out for what it is, it's not even representing the people it's supposed to. I realize a lot of my videos and opinions don't appeal to this crowd, but on the off chance any LGBT people are watching this, do you genuinely feel represented by the behavior as modern day pride parades, by the likes of Tush in Veilguard, or a 60-year-old Viola Davis being a girl boss? Or in line with the whole point of actual representation, do you just want to be left alone and live your life in peace in a way that's actually normalized like everything else? What representation today is about is pushing everyone else down, from the average Joe white guy to the feminist or queer ally who just goes about their day and doesn't make it their entire life online, so the vocal fringe minority can really just force itself upon the rest. Not only that, it's not about pride or humanizing people who are no different from you or me. What it's actually about is delusion and sick, bordering on illegal behavior. Again, I have to ask, is the photo on the right something to be proud of? The photo on the right does not normalize because it is, by its very nature, calling attention to itself. It does not evoke pride, and I would seriously question anyone who feels like they're being represented here. This is before we get to the disgusting behavior itself, let alone the responsibility of the parents bringing their child to this in the first place, and the men engaging with her. The people trying to sell you the lie of representation are delusional enough to think that what they're doing is the photo on the left, whereas what they actually want is to indulge in sexual fantasies in public and groom others into it. And by God, you're obviously transphobic or a misogynist or racist or whatever if you don't follow the party line. Do you think that's helping endear people to their cause? Do you think that's helping to normalize these people for who they are? I thought not. I won't spend too long on this section because the vanity and self-indulgence of OC culture is something I've already harped on enough about before, but I'll quickly run through some examples of how so often what the people and artists aiming for in representation is counterintuitive. Why? Because they can't do subtlety to save their life. What they're representing is really just the only substance to the character, and again, it's loudly calling attention to itself. Do you really think that's normalizing anything? I was trying to put this into words with Tash in the Veilguard video recently, but a big part of why she or they or whatever is such an infamous example when it comes to preachy, performative, and forced representation is that very same point I keep returning to. This isn't being normalized at all if you continually get up in people's faces and demand special treatment simply because you exist. Do you see anyone else doing that? Everyone's always talking about white male privilege, pretty privilege, class privilege, but suddenly it's okay when you do it because it's politically correct? Why Tash is so egregious when compared to all the other characters is that Patrick Weeks didn't even try to disguise his very obvious self-insert when writing Tash, because from minute one, she's so special and the kind of narcissistic princess that's walked straight out of AO3 fanfiction. Really, every companion in Veilguard is just as preachy and a walking, talking advertisement for their particular brand of kink. The black, muscly elf doing pull-ups with his shirt off, the spicy Italian or Spanish guy, since BioWare can't tell the difference, that loves coffee, a dapper old gentleman that for some reason makes necromancy wholesome, but that's a dead horse at this point. Another great example of insufferable characters is just about everyone from Dustborn. Take this screenshot for example, where the moment you're introduced to the central characters, it says all you need to know about them, and not for the reasons the developers were hoping. Dustborn in general is fascinating because it seems like a parody or failed attempt at a psyop, but the fact these intro screens list their various pronouns up front and rattle off easy buzzwords like drama queen or huge dork means you just know, even if every part of this game didn't scream quirky performative crap, the characters are treated as caricatures of themselves. Again, this isn't helping representation because who the fuck would find any of these people endearing or relatable? Before they open their mouths, you just know most people are itching to tell them to shut up. Also, as people have pointed out already, it's very telling that the lyrics from one of the songs from Dustborn rhymes porn with newborn, much like the spiral motif in Sweet Baby's logo actually, but we'll get into that more a bit later. The final example I'll get into here is the Outer Worlds 2. As if the first game wasn't bad enough, the putrid art style that looks like someone vomited up a bunch of crayons is the tip of the iceberg because the characters are so much worse. The intro cinematic naturally has a strong, independent woman slapping this pathetic straw man of a wimpy white guy because it's not like that's a one-way street or anything, but regardless, in Obsidian's comedic over-representation of women and ethnic minorities in positions of power throughout the game, the representation mandated by Microsoft backfired spectacularly. First of all, in their constant push for a quirky millennial snark and naturally meta-humor that unironically critiques late-stage capitalism, the devs have somehow failed to realize that in depicting the corporate dystopia, they have those same women in almost all senior roles. You know, the ones running the corporation, maybe the very reason why things are so messed up and terrible, and don't say that's secretly based or whatever, as if it was snuck in as some big-brained move or deliberately tongue-in-cheek, because from the Indian grandma assassin to the Futurama-esque head in a jar, what's meant to be earnest representation just comes across as desperate and pathetic. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single white man and in the entire game other than the Omni-Man ripoff that's not an evil mustache-twirling caricature. I won't get into this particular topic just yet, but again, it just goes to show that media like Veilguard or Dustborn or The Outer Worlds must realize on some level that they have nothing to offer on their own merit. So it's either about playing a single bit to exhaustion because that's all they have, or they have to push everyone else down to make themselves look better in comparison. Who finds any of these characters relatable, sympathetic? Could it be that the representation debate is just as hollow as the cynical branding of Pride Month come June every year? The results should speak for they themselves. On a similar note, now let's really get into the hypocrisy behind a lot of this stuff. Honestly, this could be the subject of entire theses, but I'll do my best to cover the core points. It should be a given by now that the people so obsessed with virtue signaling and representation don't actually follow the values they espouse. Much like with representation, it's not the principle of it, because it only matters when their side does it. Take cultural appropriation, for example. You may remember back around the time Ghost of Tsushima was first announced that the usual suspects, terminally online, guilt-ridden Twitter activists, were whining that an American studio, Sucker Punch, had the audacity to make a game set in feudal Japan. The irony is that Japan was so impressed by Tsushima, even though I think it's a really mediocre game that's just Assassin's Creed for all the wrong reasons, that the country later awarded the studio heads the title of cultural ambassadors to Japan. Do you think that stopped people from again complaining about Eurocentric bias or cultural appropriation or something racism as they usually do? Of course not. The question for all of these people then is, if the implication is that cultural appropriation is bad, where were you when the dumbest show ever, Robin with a Y Hood, was made? Transplanting an English folktale into a Canadian housing project full of black people that celebrate crime and cringeworthy hip-hop dancing, strawman's police violence, and all the antagonists are white as snow, while all the sympathetic ones are black? Could it be that you just might think it's okay when white culture and white stories are appropriated, when they're blackwashed, so to speak, but not the other way round? That you yourself are racist, and you just don't want to admit it because you think you have the moral high ground? How about all the major retellings of Greek myths in recent years brought on by the brain rot of TikTok? Why is it okay to appropriate stories that stretch back thousands of years and boil it down to tasteless slop for modern audiences if you're so against cultural appropriation? Is it because these texts are supposedly feminist retellings? Because I've got some bad news for you. Euripides did it first, about 2,000 years ago actually, in a play called The Trojan Women, which wipes the floor with any of the drivel you can come up with. But wait, he was just a man, so that means he's complicit in rape culture or something. This pattern is bad enough on its own, but what it really highlights is the wider issue among performative activists, the champagne socialists jerking themselves off on Twitch streams or Blue Sky, is that they don't actually think racism or misandry is bad, because once again, it's okay when our side does it. For argument's sake, let's do a quick exercise where I now completely agree with the push for representation. It's all for a good cause and not at all performative, so I'm given $200 million by Disney to make a film set in Africa. Because it's important to have representation and a wide range of voices, as they say, let's add a balding middle-aged white guy in the middle of a tribal community and see how well that's received. What's that? It's suddenly not okay? But I thought you didn't care about historical accuracy. Could it be that representation is only selective then, and doesn't include white people in black stories? Okay, how about we compromise and I put a skinhead in the next Black Panther film so we can have a more diverse cast? Oh, but now it's racist or sexist or something. How interesting that flipping the tables suddenly makes it a bad thing. It's almost like you're aware of this contradiction contradiction and just don't want to admit it. Revisionism is a plague, and something I won't get into here because it warrants like a 100-hour rant about how much I fucking hate people who have the audacity to tear down culture and deny history. But all this performative shit about cultural appropriation and rewriting colonial narratives is so obviously a one-way street. Western culture, even though I dislike the separation of the West and the East because of how it oversimplifies complex history, is currently in an identity crisis in more ways than one. A lot of this, however, stems from the fact it's obsessed with guilt and making amends for the actions of people who lived and died centuries ago. Much like the insufferable characters of Veilguard or Dustborn or the Outer Worlds 2, getting up and yelling in people's faces about how racist they are or how they should feel ashamed of existing or guilt by association when your own narrative is doing the exact same thing you're criticizing these people for under the guise of political correctness just goes to show that you're full of shit. It's not about the principle at all. It's about you feeling good about yourself and lifting yourself and others like you up while pushing everyone else down. On the subject of feminist retellings, you've probably heard of the trend or related subreddit called Men Writing Women. This is essentially just a clown on horny descriptions of boobs, sexual behavior, or other implicitly demeaning descriptions of women and parts of their body. As popular as this kind of thing seems to be though, have you ever heard about the flip side? One of the big talking points to emerge in media critique over the past 10 years or so is the idea of the male gaze. The idea that the way in which characters, mostly women, are depicted in media like movies or video games exists to fill a stereotypical and or patriarchal ideal that values them only for their bodies and sex appeal. The female gaze is conversely the idea that women are more than this, and thus an inherently better, more elevated or enlightened alternative to the lecherous, objectifying misogyny implicit to the male gaze. Again, like Men Writing Women, however, what you don't hear about is the flip side of the female gaze, and how an ever-increasing amount of women write or treat men, and even worse, underage boys. Because I hate myself apparently, and I can feel myself getting dumber by the second, for the sake of this video, I went down the rabbit hole of modern-day romance books and the whole book talk niche, which is heavily focused around so-called romantasy and cranking out the same recurring tropes for equally horny women. Misogyny is bad, but isn't it interesting that we never hear about demeaning depictions of men, particularly white men, or the exotic foreigner, which is ironically just as racist as what these texts are often trying to critique? So let me run through some terrible examples of the kind of material being made today. After all, it's only fair, right? Or is it, once again, only okay when we do it? You're gonna want a strong drink to get through this one. Daddy's Little Toy is a, book that exists, written by a Christian woman, funnily enough, called Lauren Tesselin Mastroza under the pen name Tori Woods. If the name wasn't already a dead giveaway, this book was so egregious in romanticizing pedophilia and all that sick age regression fetish shit after a fully grown man first gets attracted to a girl when she's 3 years old. The author was arrested and later charged with producing child abuse material. The fact this absolutely repulsive book ever made it to release and anyone involved thought it was okay just goes to show how bad things have gotten. But while there was rightfully huge backlash to this book at the time, you'll find that it's really not that different from books that are otherwise widely celebrated and popular. Dark romance is a subgenre and essentially a euphemism to glorifying stalking behavior, CNC, consensual non-consent, or to put it bluntly, rape fantasies. Let me read you some quotes from a few notable examples. First is from Haunting Adeline, written by H.D. Carlton, again a woman, which is about a saucy, spicy guy who stalks and, fans would say romances, others would say rapes the titular character. By the way, I'm just getting these off Goodreads and whatnot, because screw paying for any of this shit. That's fucked up. You're going going to jail, she cuts in, disgust curling her lip. Actually, I hope you go to prison and are sentenced to death. She turns with a snarl, but she doesn't make it a step before my hand snaps out, capturing her arm and whipping her back around, directly into my chest. Addie inhales sharply, her eyes dilating as I squeeze the back of her neck with one hand and grab her delectable ass with the other, lifting her up against my body. Will you be my last meal, baby? Next up, an embarrassing scream escapes as he changes the angle of his hips and hits a spot that instantly makes my legs violently shake. Oh my god, I moan, and this time I can't stop my head from dropping back to the mirror behind me and my eyes from rolling backwards. That's right, baby, I am your fucking god. He growls before I feel his teeth sink into my neck. Last one, and I told you this would be bad. Just don't forget to scream my name when you're holding that shower head to your pussy. You can come knowing that I'll be shouting yours too. Kill me. Next is Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, a college romance of sorts between a hockey player and figure skater. Haha, get it? Icebreaker? That isn't a yes. Do I need to get on my knees and beg you, Anastasia? Is that what you want? She shakes her head and laughs. The only time I ever want to see a grown man on his knees in front of me, Nate, is when his face is between my legs. So no, I don't want you to beg me. He leans back against the pillows, letting me trail my fingers across the smooth, warm planes of his stomach, all the way down to his sweatpants. Grey, obviously, because Nathan Hawkins is a man who was most definitely written by a woman. I'm trying to decide whether you put a hockey stick in bed between us, or if you're really happy to be waking up beside me. He rubbed himself against my ass, groaning next to the shell of my hair. He's a vocal guy, and it does something to me. It's like he flicks a switch somewhere and suddenly it's Niagara Falls between my legs. If I say it's a hockey stick, will you play with it? Oh my god, you are so cringe. I hate hockey. I can make you fall in love with hockey, Anastasia, he whispered, sending goosebumps across my entire body, with the right educational tools, of course, and the appropriate amount of practice. Next is Credence by Penelope Douglas, which is another book that exists, where the character just shy of 18 has sex with her step-uncle and step-cousins while staying in their cabin over the winter. But it's totally not incest, because they're not fully blood-related, right guys? And now you're 18, Terrence adds. Perfectly legal in all 50 states and just in time for the snow. I'm not sharing a woman with my 2 sons. How convenient, he spits back, after you took her away from us the other night. We had her first. Jesus Christ. I could keep going, but you get the idea. Please excuse me while I go pour bleach in my eyes. Like, it's not just me, right? This isn't smut or a bit horny here and there. This is really gross, indulgent porn, some of which is actively romanticizing illegal behavior, but it's okay when women do it. Remember, all of these examples I just went over were written by women, for women, and insanely popular among women. But yes, of course, patriarchy is the real problem here. It's not like women are actively engaging in and normalizing disgusting, degenerate behavior. Ironically, these are the same women that'll then go out and proudly claim that they're feminist, that they're against objectifying or misogynistic depictions in media, all the while they're back at home eagerly reading the exact same kind of degenerate fetish shit they criticize men for. It's disgusting. If you're into any of this stuff, man or woman, straight or queer, be it dark romance, CNC, furry, brony, whatever, you need serious clinical help. Or at the very least, try logging off for the day and go outside. Returning to the photo from the beginning, what do we call it when people try and normalize sexual behavior around children? It's a word starting with G. Just because you think it's okay doesn't make it any better than pedophiles, because guess what? That's exactly the same arguments they use. I realize this video's ended up being a bit scattergun in topics and kind of rambly, but hopefully I got the point across in just how hollow and performative the whole idea of representation and virtue signaling within media really is, and for that matter, how it always was. The people who care about representation are the ones calling attention to themselves the most and doing the exact opposite of normalizing it. The people who cry about cultural appropriation and racism are the ones doing it the most and refuse to acknowledge their stupidity and hypocrisy. The people who cry about the male gaze and sexual deviance are the ones eagerly lapping up incest porn and all the other kinds of sick, degenerate shit that should get you on a watch list. And I mean that genuinely. Authors who have made entire careers out of this shit, like Sarah J. Maas and Colleen Hoover, but it's okay to rape, groom, and normalize other sick, illegal behavior when a woman's doing it, I guess. You people are so full of shit. Buckle up, because the next and final video in this little series is going to be going after the worst of the worst. If or when it gets released, I don't care whether it gets me banned or not. Thanks for watching.